The slap cracked through the first-class cabin like a gunshot, sharp enough to silence the hum of the engines for one terrifying second, and the woman who received it felt the world tilt as if gravity itself had decided she did not belong there. Her name was Imani Cole, and in that instant, with her cheek burning and her ears ringing, she tasted the metallic memory of every door ever slammed in her face. The cabin was bright with midday sun pouring through oval windows, lighting up polished wood veneers and cream leather seats that smelled faintly of citrus wipes and expensive cologne. Passengers froze mid-gesture, phones half-raised, mouths parted, eyes darting between the flight attendant whose hands still trembled in the air and the black woman shrinking into herself in a cashmere sweater she had saved months to buy, not because it was expensive, but because it made her feel like she had finally arrived somewhere safe. Imani's life had taught her not to cry in public. Growing up in Bay Ridge Terrace, she learned early that tears invited scrutiny, and scrutiny invited judgment. Her mother cleaned offices at dawn and stocked shelves at night, whispering prayers over burnt coffee and aching knees, telling her daughter that dignity was a muscle you had to train every day. Imani trained hard. She earned scholarships, worked double shifts, built a logistics startup from a folding table and a borrowed laptop. Even now, seated in first class on a daylight flight arching west over quilted fields and rivers like ribbons of glass, she felt like a trespasser in a museum of privilege. She had boarded quietly, smiled politely, and tucked her long braids behind her ears as if making herself smaller could prevent the collision that had just happened anyway. The flight attendant, Marjorie Hale, had a past of her own that pressed against her ribs like an invisible corset. Raised in a family that prized order over empathy, she believed rules were a life raft. Marjorie had clawed her way up from economy routes to the coveted first-class assignment, the kind that came with pressed Navy uniforms and a belief that you were guarding a gate. That morning, sunlight glinted off her gold pin as turbulence rattled her nerves. She had noticed Imani's boarding pass, misread confidence as defiance, and felt a familiar surge of fear disguised as authority. The slap was not planned, it was the ugly reflex of a lifetime of being told to maintain control at any cost. Phones rose like periscopes. A man in a pale blue suit stiffened, his jaw tightening. A woman near the window pressed her lips thin, eyes flicking to the aisle as if searching for an exit from the moment. The cabin crew supervisor hurried forward, his face blanching as he took in the scene, while a murmur spread, low and electric, ricocheting off curved walls. Imani's chest felt hollow, a cave echoing with her own heartbeat. She tasted humiliation, old and familiar, and something else too, a fierce, stubborn ember refusing to go out. If you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, pure kindness asks you right now to pause, breathe, and show your support by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing, because stories like this only matter if we carry them together. Imani pressed her palm to her cheek and forced her spine straight. The world narrowed to details as her mind raced, the way it always did when survival demanded clarity. She noticed the stitching on the seat seam, the gentle vibration beneath her feet, the way sunlight caught dust motes dancing like tiny witnesses. She thought of her father, a pilot who never made it past regional airlines, who taught her to read weather maps and trust instruments when clouds tried to lie. She remembered the hangar smell of oil and sky, the way he would say that ownership was not about things, but about responsibility. He died before he could see what she built, before she could tell him she had finally bought back the small charter company that fired him years ago under a polite excuse. She had done it quietly, without press releases, without applause, because revenge was never the point. Restoration was. The supervisor murmured apologies that floated uselessly in the air, his hands fluttering. Security personnel from the cockpit approached, their footsteps measured, eyes scanning. Marjorie's face hardened, then faltered, as if she were seeing herself from a distance for the first time. She expected Imani to shrink, to apologize for existing in the wrong seat, to be escorted out like an inconvenience. Instead, Imani stood, her knees wobbling only for a second before she steadied herself. The cabin seemed to lean toward her, a theater holding its breath. She did not raise her voice. She did not point. She spoke with the calm of someone used to boardrooms and balance sheets, to decisions that affected lives far beyond her own reflection. The words were simple, almost gentle, and they landed with the weight of a truth that rearranged the room. She explained that she owned the aircraft through a holding company that leased it to the airline, that she had flown this route to inspect maintenance reports, that she had chosen first class not as a performance but as a seat she had paid for many times over. As her explanation unfolded, faces drained of color, and the supervisor's posture collapsed inward, like a tent pole pulled from the ground. The daylight outside seemed brighter, the world sharpening its edges. A ripple of disbelief moved through the cabin, followed by something like shame. The man in the pale blue suit lowered his phone. The woman by the window swallowed hard. Marjorie's shoulders sagged, her breath hitching as if she had run headlong into a mirror she could not shatter. Years of assumptions, of power borrowed and misused, crashed down in a single instant. She felt small not because someone made her small, but because she finally understood the scale of her mistake. Time slowed. Procedures kicked in with mechanical precision. An incident report was initiated. The captain was informed. The supervisor's voice shook as he asked Imani what she needed, his words finally carrying the weight of accountability. Imani asked for a moment, and in that pause, she allowed herself to feel everything she had denied herself permission to feel. The anger rose, hot and sharp, followed by grief for the younger version of herself who had swallowed worse slights in darker rooms. Tears threatened, and she let one fall, not as surrender, but as release. She thought of her mother's hands, cracked and steady, of her father's laugh echoing in a hangar, of nights hunched over spreadsheets while the city slept. She thought of the pilots she now employed, the mechanics whose mortgages depended on her signature, the interns who looked like her and dared to imagine more. Responsibility pressed against her heart, heavy and clarifying. She knew what power could do when wielded without mercy, and she knew what it could heal when guided by purpose. Imani did not ask for Marjorie to be dragged away. She asked for accountability that taught, not erased. She requested that the airline review its training, that apologies be public and meaningful, that Marjorie be removed from duty for the flight and placed into a restorative process with oversight. It was not leniency, it was leadership. The supervisor nodded, eyes wet, scribbling notes as if they were lifelines. The plane eventually pushed back, sunlight gliding along the wing like a promise. Imani returned to her seat, the cabin quieter now, charged with an understanding that could not be unseen. As the aircraft lifted, fields giving way to clouds like torn cotton, something shifted in the collective posture of the room. People sat straighter, breathed deeper. A woman across the aisle offered a small nod of respect. It was not absolution, but it was something. Marjorie sat in the jump seat for a moment before being escorted off, her gaze fixed on her hands. In that stillness, she confronted a lifetime of inherited fear and the damage it had done. There would be consequences. There would also be a chance to learn, if she chose it. The daylight washed over her face as she stood, illuminating lines she had never noticed, a human being stripped of uniform and illusion. As the flight cruised, Imani looked out at the blue expanse, thinking of ownership again, of what it truly meant. Not domination, not entitlement, but stewardship. She imagined a future where first-class cabins did not serve as battlegrounds for dignity, where assumptions were interrogated before they were acted upon. She drafted a memo in her head, practical and firm, about policy changes and listening sessions, about data and stories braided together. This was not the end of a viral moment, it was the beginning of work. If this story has touched your heart, Pure Kindness asks you near this moment to show your support by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing, because empathy grows when we choose to amplify it. Before the final descent, a quiet settled that felt earned. The Engine's steady song became a lullaby of resolve. Imani closed her eyes and allowed herself a small smile, not of triumph, but of alignment. She was exactly where she belonged, not because she owned metal and wings, but because she owned her story and the responsibility it carried. Please take a moment now to comment and share what this moment made you feel, because your words keep stories like this alive. The plane touched down under a clear afternoon sky, tires kissing the runway with a soft insistence that grounded everything that had happened above. Passengers disembarked with slower steps, thoughtful, changed in ways that would reveal themselves later in conversations and choices. Imani lingered at the door, sunlight framing her silhouette, and breathed in the smell of jet fuel and possibility. The world outside was imperfect and often cruel, but it was also malleable, shaped by moments when someone chose courage over silence. She walked forward carrying that knowledge, leaving behind a cabin that would remember the day daylight exposed a truth, and a woman who stood up not to conquer, but to heal, reminding everyone watching that dignity, once claimed, can lift an entire room into something better.